Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. It was late. Too late, really, but I didn't mind. I was used to these hours, the quiet ones that drifted by in the still of the night, when the world seemed to fade into nothing but the soft hum of city lights and the constant clatter of my fingers against the keys of my laptop. Journalism wasn't a 9-to-5 job. I had deadlines to meet, investigations to pursue, and stories that begged to be told. But tonight, something was different. I had been at the library, working deep into the night on an assignment, when I finally decided it was time to go home. The campus was dark, eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. My feet dragged as I walked down the empty streets, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. The streets were deserted, not a soul in sight, and the further I walked, the more unnerving it felt. By the time I reached the train station, it was just past 2:57 a.m. The platform was empty, silent, too silent, the kind of stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced around, feeling a gnawing unease settle in my stomach. The train station looked so old, forgotten even. The brick walls were cracked, and the overhead lights flickered like they were about to go out. It was a place that seemed to belong to another time, a place where time itself had stopped moving. It felt wrong, as if the world had shifted, leaving me behind in this strange, deserted corner of reality. I checked my phone, but the screen was black. No signal. It was strange, but I didn't have the energy to worry about it. I just needed to get home. I could see the train tracks stretching out before me, lost in the dark. There was no sound, no rumble from an approaching train. Just that oppressive silence. And then, just as I was about to turn and leave, came the sound. A low, distant whistle. It was strange, haunting, almost like it was calling to me. My pulse quickened as the train slowly appeared from the foggy darkness, its headlights cutting through the blackness like searching eyes. It was massive, far bigger than I'd expected, its sleek body gleaming in the faint light. The train glided toward me with an unnatural smoothness, its wheels not screeching against the tracks but moving silently, as if it were floating just above them. The door opened with a soft metallic groan, and I could feel the cold draft escaping from the train, as though inviting me in. The urge to climb aboard was overwhelming. I don't know why, but I stepped forward, pulled in by something I couldn't explain. My hand hesitated on the door handle for just a moment, and then it was as if my body moved without my permission. I stepped inside. The air inside was icy cold, and it hit me like a wave, making my skin crawl. The train was so quiet, too quiet. The seats were plush, dark green, but they looked so pristine, almost as if they'd never been sat in. The lighting was dim, casting long, strange shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the floor and walls. There was no sign of life anywhere. No conductor, no other passengers. It was as though the train had been waiting for me, empty but for my own presence. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing far too loudly in the silence. It was unsettling. The train cars stretched endlessly, the same unoccupied seats, the same eerie stillness. I couldn't help but feel watched, though I couldn't say why. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but can't quite pinpoint what it is. I sat down near the window, trying to shake the feeling that was settling into my chest like a weight. Outside, the world was nothing but black, no streetlights, no city, just an endless void that made my heart race in a way I couldn't control. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps. I turned to look, and that's when I saw him. The conductor. He was standing at the far end of the car, wearing a dark uniform that looked like it belonged to another era, his face pale, his eyes cold and unblinking. His presence was almost otherworldly, like he was some kind of apparition, detached from the world around him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, eyes fixed, unblinking, as if studying me, waiting for something. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. "Ticket?" he asked, his voice soft, almost mechanical. I don't have one," I said, my voice unsteady. "I'm just trying to get home." He didn't respond, not in any way that made sense. He simply nodded, his face as expressionless as before, and moved down the aisle with silent steps that didn't even disturb the air. He was like a shadow, passing through the car as if he wasn't really there at all. I couldn't explain why, but I felt uneasy. His eyes, they had an emptiness to them, like they were not quite human, not quite alive. I looked around again, hoping to see some sign that this was all just a strange dream or a bizarre coincidence. But no, the train was still moving. I could feel the rhythm beneath my feet, but it was all wrong. The stillness was unnerving, and I felt like I was trapped in a space that was beyond time. Then, an old woman appeared at the end of the car. She was hunched over, her cane tapping rhythmically on the floor as she made her way toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was old, her face etched with deep wrinkles, and her clothes seemed faded, as if she had stepped out of a memory. She stopped in front of me, leaning on her cane as she gazed at me with an intensity that felt like it could pierce straight through me. "You're on the wrong train, child," she said, her voice raspy, as though it had been used to speak warnings for centuries. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to get home." The woman's eyes narrowed, and she leaned in closer, her face now inches from mine. "This train, it doesn't stop, child. It never does. You'll miss your stop, and then you'll be lost. Just like the rest of us." Before I could respond, she turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the shadows of the next car. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic, leaving an unsettling weight in my chest. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of wrongness grew. The train was moving too smoothly, the shadows too deep, the silence too perfect. Outside, there was nothing, just an endless stretch of blackness. And in that moment I realized I wasn't just on a train. I was on a journey that I couldn't control, and the train wasn't stopping anytime soon. I don't know how to explain it. Everything about that night felt wrong from the moment I set foot on the platform. The train station was almost deserted, just the faint echo of my footsteps bouncing off the cracked pavement. The air was too still, unnervingly still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The clock above the station read 2:57 a.m., the numbers flickering in the dim light as I stood there, trying to shake the creeping sense of unease settling in my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was just a journalism student trying to get home after a long night in the library. But somehow, this place felt different, out of place. I checked my phone, hoping for some kind of confirmation that I wasn't imagining things, but the screen was dead. No signal. My stomach twisted. That shouldn't have happened. I checked it only a few minutes ago, and yet it was like I had stepped into a world where technology had no power. The platform stretched out before me, deserted. The station was old in a way that felt forgotten, abandoned by time. The walls were weathered, the overhead lights flickering as if they too were uncertain whether they belonged here. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. No, this silence was suffocating, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I glanced at the train tracks, the dark stretch of metal disappearing into the night. Where was everyone? The train was supposed to be here soon. But when? I didn't have the patience to wait, but something tugged at me, making me linger. And then, just as if summoned by my thoughts, the train appeared. The whistle was low and distant at first, the sound too haunting, too strange. It wasn't the usual rush of a train coming to the station. No, this was a warning. A whisper in the wind that made the hairs on my neck stand up. My heart began to race as the train slowly emerged from the fog, a massive, looming shadow in the night. The headlights sliced through the dark, casting long, distorted beams across the platform. It was too big, too perfect. It looked like it had just appeared out of nowhere, like it had been waiting for me. The doors opened with a mechanical groan, inviting me in. There was a cold draft that swept out from inside, hitting me like a gust of ice. And for a moment, just a moment, I hesitated. But then the strange pull that I couldn't explain took over. I stepped forward, my feet moving almost of their own accord, as if the train were calling to me. I grabbed the door handle, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. It wasn't normal, none of this was normal. But I stepped inside anyway. The moment I crossed that threshold, the air hit me with a bone-chilling coldness. It was like stepping into another world. The train car was pristine, too clean, too perfect. The seats, dark green and plush, looked like they hadn't been touched by anyone in years. The faint glow of overhead lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows on the floor. I looked around, expecting to see other passengers, but there was no one. The car was empty, silent. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps unnervingly loud in the stillness. I felt the weight of the silence pressing in around me, a heavy, suffocating presence that made it hard to breathe. The train didn't feel like it was moving, not in the usual way. There was a strange stillness to it, like it was gliding above the tracks. The rhythmic hum of the engine was too smooth, too perfect. It didn't sound right. I took a seat near the window, trying to calm my nerves, but when I looked outside, all I saw was darkness. No city lights, no familiar street signs, just an endless, empty void. My pulse quickened. What kind of train was this? And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the car. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the sound, and that's when I saw him, the conductor. He stood at the far end of the car, motionless. His uniform was old, tattered even, and his face was pale, too pale. His eyes were black, empty. There was no warmth, no emotion behind them. He wasn't just staring at me, he was watching me. As if he knew something I didn't, as if he was waiting for something. He didn't speak right away, he just stood there, his eyes locked onto mine, never blinking, never moving. It was as though he was studying me, waiting for me to make the next move. The silence between us stretched too long, too thick. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every instinct telling me to get off the train, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't move. And then, finally, his voice broke the silence. "Ticket?" I froze. The sound of his voice was soft, unnervingly soft, but it was like a jolt to my system. I didn't know what to say. I don't have one. I just need to get home." He didn't respond. His eyes never left mine. He didn't even flinch, didn't move a muscle. There was no expression on his face. Nothing. He just stood there, watching, waiting. The train moved again, and the sound of the wheels grinding against the track seemed too loud now, too harsh. But the conductor, he didn't move. He didn't speak. His presence was overwhelming, like a shadow hanging over me. A shadow I couldn't escape. Without another word, he turned and started to walk down the aisle, his footsteps unnervingly quiet, like he was floating. As he passed by me, his eyes lingered for just a moment longer, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his gaze following me, even as he disappeared into the next car. I sat there, frozen, my mind racing. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. It wasn't just the conductor, it was the train itself. The way it moved, the way everything felt off. I glanced around again, hoping to see someone, anyone, but the train was still empty. I was alone. And then, just as I was starting to breathe again, the air grew colder, the temperature dropping unnaturally fast. My breath turned to mist in front of me, swirling in the air like smoke. My body shook from the cold. I tried to look outside, but all I could see was the same unending darkness. This was no ordinary train. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew, deep down, I was no longer in control. I didn't know where this train was going, but I had a sinking feeling I wasn't supposed to be on it. And the conductor knew it. I didn't understand it at first. Maybe I still don't. But that night, everything felt wrong. The station was empty, like something had swallowed all the life from it, leaving nothing but shadows and broken walls behind. The clock on the wall read 2:57 a.m., and the cold, stale air clung to my skin like a heavy fog. I was tired. Maybe that's why I didn't question things at first. But as I stood there, the silence began to press in on me. The kind of silence that felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. Someone. I checked my phone. Nothing, no signal. Just a dead screen staring back at me. That didn't feel normal either, but again, I ignored it. The train would be here soon, I thought. I just needed to get home. The station stretched out before me, abandoned, like it hadn't seen a soul in years. The rusting rails and flickering lights made it seem like I'd stepped into an old, forgotten part of the world, like time had simply skipped over it. I tried to shake the feeling that something was watching me, but it lingered, thickening the air with unease. Then I heard it. A soft whistle. Distant at first, like it was coming from some far-off dream. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. It was too eerie, too unsettling. The sound seemed to twist, echoing off the walls and drawing me in. I turned, and there it was. A train, not just any train. This one was massive, its headlights cutting through the darkness like the eyes of a creature emerging from some abyss. It moved so smoothly, almost as though it were floating, gliding effortlessly toward the platform. The air grew colder as it approached, and when the door slid open with a groan, the chill wrapped around me, pulling me closer, against my will. I didn't know why I stepped aboard. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the pull of the train itself, its invitation that I couldn't resist. My hand reached for the handle, and before I could think better of it, I was inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air turned frigid. It wasn't the usual cold that you feel when you're outside at night. No, this was different. It cut straight to my bones. The train was eerily quiet, too quiet. The seats were immaculate, untouched, as if no one had ever sat in them. The lights above flickered faintly, casting long, strange shadows across the car, making the whole place feel wrong. I glanced out the window. All I could see was darkness. Not the usual urban sprawl or the dim glow of streetlights, but something deeper. A void. The city had vanished, and in its place was only black. I turned away, my stomach tight with a feeling I couldn't quite explain. The train jerked forward, and for a moment the stillness of it all was overwhelming. It felt like time itself had frozen. And then I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, almost imperceptible, like someone moving in the distance. But as they grew closer, I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to look, and that's when I saw him, the conductor. He stood at the far end of the car, just inside the doorway. His uniform was old, tattered at the edges, but strangely clean. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes were dark, empty. They didn't reflect the light, they just swallowed it whole. It was like he wasn't quite human. I could feel him watching me, his gaze unwavering, and for a moment I wondered if he could see right through me, into the depths of my thoughts. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, still, his eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened, and my breath came shallow. I wanted to look away, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It was like I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, his voice broke the silence. "Ticket?" I froze. His voice was soft, too soft, but it sliced through the thick air of the train with ease. My throat went dry, and I struggled to find my voice. I don't have one," I stammered. "I'm just trying to get home." The conductor didn't blink, didn't respond. He just nodded slowly, almost as though he'd already heard everything I had to say. And then, without another word, he turned and began walking down the aisle, his footsteps strangely muffled, like he was floating just above the floor. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The weight of his gaze still clung to me, even as he disappeared into the next car. The train jerked again, and the low hum of the engine seemed to grow louder, more pronounced. The cold in the car deepened, and my breath formed clouds in front of me. I felt the pull of panic in my chest, but I couldn't explain why. And then, just when I thought the silence was going to swallow me whole, it happened. I heard another sound, this time closer. The tap of a cane, rhythmic and slow, echoing in the stillness. I turned. At the far end of the car, an old woman appeared. She was hunched over, her frail body leaning heavily on a crooked cane, which she tapped against the floor with every step. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and they gleamed in the dim light. She looked at me like she knew something I didn't, something important. She shuffled closer, her gaze never leaving mine, and I felt her presence in the pit of my stomach. Her old, cracked voice broke the silence. "You're on the wrong train, child," she rasped, her words slow and deliberate. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask. "I'm just trying to get home." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned in closer, her face hovering inches from mine, and her breath, cold, damp, flooded my senses. "This train," she whispered, "it doesn't stop, child." "It never does, and you'll miss your stop, just like the rest of us." I recoiled, the weight of her words hitting me like a punch to the chest. What are you talking about?" She tilted her head, her gaze intensifying. "You're already too late. You'll never leave. This train keeps going, forever." Before I could ask her anything else, she turned and began shuffling away, her cane tapping the floor with every step. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating, wrapping themselves around me like a shroud. I stared after her, my mind racing, but she was gone. I was left there, alone, the echoes of her voice ringing in my ears. "You'll miss your stop." The train continued to move, the darkness outside pressing in on me from every angle. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. What did she mean? What was this train really? I looked around the empty car, but I didn't feel alone. I felt trapped. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But deep down, I knew there was nowhere to go. The train wasn't stopping, and I had already missed my stop. I don't know how to explain it. How I didn't see it sooner. How the pieces didn't click until it was too late. But as the train sped through the night, something deep inside me, the core of my being, knew that I was no longer just a passenger. This wasn't a late-night ride. This wasn't just some strange, empty train. I was trapped. Trapped in a place I couldn't understand. A place where time didn't exist, and death was the only certainty. I had been sitting there for what felt like hours, staring out at the black void outside the window, but I hadn't been paying attention. I had tried to distract myself, to focus on anything other than the fear growing in my chest. The train moved so smoothly that it felt like it wasn't even on tracks. The hum beneath me was constant, but somehow it seemed too perfect, too steady, like it wasn't a real train at all. And as the shadows stretched across the empty car, something gnawed at the edges of my mind. Something I couldn't ignore. The old woman's warning was still fresh in my thoughts, her voice haunting me. "You're on the wrong train, child." Her words had felt like a cryptic riddle, a puzzle I didn't quite understand. But now I did. I had to understand. It never stops. Her words echoed in my head, over and over, as though the train itself were forcing them into my thoughts. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, faster, harder with each passing second. The walls of the train car felt like they were closing in on me. The air had turned cold, too cold, and my breath came out in soft, shuddering clouds. But it wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. I'm dead. The thought came suddenly, without warning, and it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I didn't know why it took so long to figure it out, but now, as the train kept moving, I understood. This train wasn't just going nowhere, it was going back. It was taking me somewhere I couldn't escape from. And then I remembered. The accident, the crash, the one that should have taken my life. I had cheated death once. I had escaped it. But now, here on this train, I had been caught. The old woman, the conductor, the emptiness, it was all part of it. I wasn't supposed to survive. I staggered to my feet, my hands shaking as I grabbed for the nearest seat to steady myself. My mind was spinning. The train, this train, wasn't taking me anywhere. It was just a place. A place for souls, for the lost ones who had no way out. And now, I realized with sickening clarity, I was one of them. The conductor's face flashed in my mind, his cold, empty eyes, his quiet, emotionless stare. He knew. He knew exactly what I had done, what I had avoided. And now there was no way to turn back. I reached for the door. My fingers fumbled against the cold metal handle, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again, panic rising in my chest, but the door was sealed shut. It wouldn't open. It couldn't open. I could feel the train moving faster now, as if it were urging me forward, as if it had sensed that I finally understood. The walls of the car seemed to pulse, the sound of the wheels screeching against the tracks growing louder, more frantic. The temperature dropped even more, and I could see my breath forming in the air, swirling around me. My pulse was in my throat, choking me. I couldn't breathe. The panic rose, but there was no escape. There never had been. I stumbled back toward the window, pressing my face against the cold glass, desperate for something, anything, that would make sense of this nightmare. But there was nothing. Just darkness. An endless, suffocating void. And that's when I saw it. The flash of light, the screeching of metal, the crash. It was happening again. I could see it, the wreckage, the twisted metal, the flash of headlights, The sharp, jagged lines of the accident that should have killed me years ago. The train was no longer moving through nothingness. It was moving back. Back to that moment. Back to the crash. My mind raced as the truth hit me like a bolt of lightning. I wasn't on a train. I was caught in the aftermath of my death. Stuck between worlds, and this train, the train I thought was just a way home, was pulling me toward the moment I had avoided. The crash. The one I should have died in. The one I would finally die in. It was inevitable. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but it didn't matter. The train had already claimed me. The conductor, the train, the endless dark. It had all been waiting for me, for this moment. My mind screamed for escape, but I knew it was too late. There was no way off this train. There was no getting out. And then, as if in answer to my thoughts, the train lurched violently, throwing me against the seat. The world outside the window was no longer the endless void. The crash was right there, unfolding before me in slow motion. The twisted wreckage of the car, the glass shattering, the screams of people, the screams of me. I realized then, with absolute certainty, that this was it. The train had never been about taking me anywhere. It was just the journey I had to make to finally meet my fate. The one I had been avoiding for so long. The train was only the way to get there. And when I stepped off, I would be standing in the wreckage of the past. It's happening. It's finally happening. The train screeched again, and the world blurred, the chaos outside growing louder. The moment of impact was coming. There was no escaping it. The crash was the end, and it was mine. I closed my eyes, bracing for the final blow, but there was no escape, no getting off. It was too late. The train had already claimed me. I still can't wrap my mind around it. I should have realized sooner. It all started off so innocently, but now, as the train moves faster and the world outside the window dissolves into an endless black void, I can't deny the truth anymore. I was never supposed to survive. The cold inside the train has become unbearable, the chill sinking deep into my bones. My breath comes out in soft clouds, and I pull my jacket tighter around myself. But it does nothing to stop the creeping sense of dread that's been building inside me since I first stepped onto this train. The silence in the car feels suffocating, oppressive, and no matter how many times I glance around, there's nothing. No passengers, no sounds, nothing but the humming of the train as it speeds forward through the darkness. The train, the conductor, the cold. It all feels wrong, like something has been twisted out of place. The weight of the old woman's words pounds in my head, a constant reminder of the truth that I was too blind to see until now. You're on the wrong train, child. I didn't understand it then, but now it all makes sense. This train doesn't stop. The realization hits me like a thunderclap, sudden and deafening. It's not just the train that doesn't stop. I don't stop. I'm already dead. I try to shake it off, try to convince myself that it's just the fear talking. But the more I think about it, the clearer it becomes. The train isn't a ride. It's not just a way home. It's a journey for the lost, the souls who didn't make it. And now, I'm one of them. I was supposed to die that night. The crash. The one that should have claimed my life years ago. But somehow, I managed to cheat fate. I don't know how, but I did. And now, here I am, caught in the aftermath. Stuck in a place between life and death. The train isn't taking me anywhere. It's taking me back. Back to that moment when my life should have ended. It's been waiting for me all along. I stand up from my seat, my hands shaking, my chest tightening with panic. The world outside the window is a blur, a twisted mess of lights and shadows, as if the very fabric of reality is unraveling before my eyes. The train shakes violently, and I clutch the seat in front of me to steady myself. My heart is racing now, the fear choking me, but I can't move. There's nowhere to run. I'm stuck in this endless ride, caught in the very moment of my death, and there's no escape. This was never a train to take me home. I stumble forward, my legs unsteady beneath me as the train lurches again. I reach for the door, desperate to open it, to leave, but the handle won't turn. The door is locked, impossibly locked, as if it's not even real. I pull harder, panic rising in my chest, but the door won't budge. There's no way out. The walls feel like they're closing in on me, the air growing thicker, colder, suffocating. The train moves faster now, like it's being pulled towards something inevitable. The conductor's eyes flash in my mind, those empty, lifeless eyes, and I know, without a doubt, that he's been watching me this whole time. Waiting for me to understand. And then, just like that, he's there. He's standing at the end of the car, silent, motionless. His gaze is fixed on me, as cold and unblinking as ever. I feel his presence in every inch of my skin, like a weight pressing down on me. I want to scream, to run, but I can't move. "You can't leave." His voice finally breaks the silence, cold and distant. "This is your stop." I stare at him, unable to form the words. It's like my mouth has gone dry, like my very body refuses to believe what I already know. But the truth is undeniable now. The train isn't going anywhere. This is where it ends. And then it all clicks into place. The panic, the fear, the overwhelming sense of inevitability, the wreckage outside the window, the twisted metal, the flashing lights, the crash. It was never an accident. I've been riding this train ever since that night. The crash wasn't just something I survived, it was my fate, my destiny. I was supposed to die, but I escaped it. I thought I had cheated it, but now it's catching up with me. The train isn't taking me anywhere, it's taking me back to that moment, back to that crash. And when I step off this train, when I reach the end of this ride, that's when the moment will finally happen. The crash will claim me. The fate I avoided will swallow me whole. The train jerks again, and I can feel it picking up speed, hurtling toward the end of the track, the end of my journey, the end of everything. I try to move, to get off, but it's no use. The train doesn't stop, it's never going to stop. I can see it now, the lights, the screeching of metal, the glass shattering, the twisted wreckage. It's all there. I've been running from it my whole life, but now it's here. I close my eyes, bracing for the impact, for the moment when the crash finally comes. It's time. I've been riding this train, trying to outrun fate, but it's always been right behind me. Now, there's nowhere to go. The end has finally arrived. The crash is inevitable. And when I step off this train, it will all be over. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.